The Candid Frame is supported by donations by listeners just like you. Help us to bring you great conversations with great photographers. Support the show today with your monthly contribution through our Patreon effort at patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or click on the link in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. Thank you.
This is Ibarien X, and this is The Candid Frame. One of the challenges for any photographer is photographing in his or her own backyard. It's just too easy to take what's in our neighborhood for granted. We see it every day, hence, what could be so special about it? But therein lies the power of photography. Its ability to reveal the familiar and mundane in wonderful new ways. And that is what makes the photography of Kwasi Boyd-Bouldin so special. He photographs the City of Angels by documenting its endless and overlapping signage, strip malls, and palm trees, and does so from a personal point of view. The result is polarizing for sure. For some, it's a confirmation of the Los Angeles of their memories and their current experiences, while for others, it lacks the beauty and mystery of the city's manufactured mythology. And therein lies the strength of his work. It doesn't leave the viewer thinking just one thing. It challenges you to give a little thought to what you think you're seeing. I was really struck by your work. I was born in New York, but I was raised in LA, so I really have very little memory of New York. So Los Angeles has been it for me.
Okay.
And taking a look at your photographs, I think it's one of the few times that I could actually say I saw my Los Angeles in somebody's pictures. And I think you probably have heard that, other people share that from some of the comments that I've seen other people make about your photographs. But I think it's interesting that, like me, you're a transplant. Yeah. So before we get into the photographs, tell us about how your family ended up coming out to Los Angeles.
Basically, pretty much like I was saying, I was born in Brooklyn. My family came out here when I was 2.5. And what prompted my family to come out here was my father moved out here. I'm the only child of my mom and my dad. I have 4 older siblings on my mom's side, and I have a few other siblings on my father's side also. But I'm the only product of their relationship. And they were together for about 11 years in New York, in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And then, they ended that relationship, after I was born. And my father moved to California to basically to get out of Brooklyn. And, so, he migrated out here, and my mom followed because one of the, my mom wanted me to have a relationship with my dad. And my older siblings were getting a little bit older, and we lived in Brownsville, and she thought that LA or Hollywood in particular might be a better environment for them in the long run. And then that's pretty much what prompted it. So I've been out here since I was about 2.5, 3 years old, and Hollywood, Los Angeles, the LA area in general is home for me. There really isn't anything else. So
what was the neighborhood you were first in that you have a memory of?
The first neighborhood I have a memory of is Hollywood. Went to Vine Street Elementary School, right on Vine between Melrose and Santa Monica. And we had a kind of a duplex apartment off of Hudson and Romaine. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure we moved there about the time I was 4. I think when we first moved to California, we had a short stint in South LA off of Slauson and Van Ness. But after that, we moved to Hollywood, and that's kind of when I started to notice the neighborhood around me, and I actually remember, friends playing outside, things of that sort.
So you mentioned Hollywood, and people who are not from here have an image in their head, right? They think Hollywood, celebrity, sports cars, champagne. That's not the Hollywood that you grew up with, or I grew up with. So
yeah, no, not at all.
So for people who are not familiar, describe your Hollywood.
Well, my Hollywood is basically a place that's it's a pretty normal place. And that is only kind of shocking in contrast to the narrative that's the way it's normally depicted. But I mean, I grew up, I would probably classify it as maybe like lower middle class, the part. Everyone was working class is probably the best way to describe it, at least when I was younger. Really large immigrant population, very diverse, really nice. It was a lot quieter and a lot calmer when I was a kid, and it steadily got a lot more hectic, and things changed in Hollywood over the time that I lived there. Mm-hmm. I would definitely say that, I mean, it's hard to say normal because I realize normal means so many different things to so many different people, but that's kind of my baseline. And it was just a nice neighborhood. We played outside, we rode bikes, skateboarding was big. That's pretty much the best way I can describe it. Really diverse, really low key.
Yeah, because that East Hollywood area, I mean, we come from slightly different generations, but I think, because I was hanging out there during like the 70s.
Okay.
So you're probably late 80s, 90s. So this
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, my time in Hollywood is basically late 80s, right into the 90s mostly. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it really didn't change a lot during that time, because I think, like you said, it's incredibly diverse. I mean, there is a large Armenian community. There are the Thai community, Latinos from not only Mexico, from Central America. I mean, man, an incredible mashup. And I think that part of Los Angeles is kind of rare, because people are very surprised at how segregated Los Angeles, the city, is.
Absolutely.
And that this is a pocket of Los Angeles where within a very short time you could experience very different cultures in a very small area, which I think is really kind of amazing.
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot of that is one of the biggest, parts of who I am as a person. I mean, aside from who I am as a photographer, but I mean, that's the sort of environment I grew up in. I mean, I grew up with friends from everywhere. I grew up with just a large variety of experiences from different cultures. And that was the norm for not only myself, but for the people I grew up with also. So in a lot of ways, when I got older and went to junior high school, places where, people from outside of Hollywood would come, that was where I realized how unique my upbringing in Hollywood actually was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that part of Los Angeles is like, sometimes I want to describe it as concrete and strip malls, right?
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's so densely populated that if it isn't, apartment buildings, it's all these sort of stores, and there's not, you don't think about that part of town as having a lot of green space. It's there.
Yeah.
So, sort of growing up as a kid, I know you didn't have anything really to sort of compare it with, but can you talk about how you sort of, because your photographs really reflect the community in a really unique way. And I'm just curious as how, looking back, you felt you experienced, the neighborhoods with all the things that make it what it is.
I mean, I think that one of the keys to kind of how I put together my approach to documenting Hollywood, I mean, it really does have a lot to do with skateboarding, skateboard culture, and, what led into graffiti art for me personally. I skateboarded for like 12 years, from the time that I was like 10 to 12, all through Koreatown, Hollywood, downtown LA, pretty much at the height of the street skating movement, or at the emergence of it, rather, in LA at the time, basically early to mid 90s. And you just see a lot of the city, and it was a time before skateboarding. It was before the X Games. It was before it had hit any sort of popular critical mass. And in a lot of ways, my friends and I were outcasts. We weren't the cool kids at school because we skateboarded. There was no money in it. We were basically a bunch of ragtag kids that just, skateboarded up and down the street and made a lot of noise and had fun doing it. That kind of showed me how the city not only can be experienced in a different way than most people, but also I just looked at things. I just looked at structures. I just looked at buildings and streets and curbs in a context that other people, or a lot of other people, didn't really see it as. And that actually carried over to graffiti art also. I was never a super prolific graffiti writer or anything like that, but it was a community I was deeply a part of. All of my friends were a part of. And looking at the walls and looking at the city in that way, through that lens, also basically shaped the way that I see it. And after, I outgrew kind of my rebellious phase, that aesthetic stuck.
Yeah.
And that that kind of combined with, some personal stuff, some, family tragedies, just life and getting older in a place in general really kind of combined into the way that I approach it. And I start with the landscape just because the landscape tells a story to me. And like most people see the LA landscape as particularly nondescript, or they don't really see the magic or the charm in it. But, really when it comes down to it, everything that I talked about, including like the painful stuff for me, took place on these streets. And so I really like to depict them and kind of elevate them in a way that is, above just some place you would drive through.
Yeah, yeah. And that painful experience is the loss of your sister.
Amongst other things. Honestly, Hollywood, in a lot of ways, Hollywood is rough in ways that people don't understand. I've witnessed a friend pass away. We were shot at. It was a drive-by right in the middle of Hollywood. I've been, chased. This is Hollywood. Especially in the 90s, like it was a rough place. And in a lot of ways, it still is. There's a ton of gang activity. There's a large drug presence. And all of that is on top of, what happened with my sister and the issues that she had. And it's just, it's I chose to use the landscape as a medium to kind of record and express that, because I felt like that was the best way for me to tell it or present it in the way that it kind of resonated with me. Mm-hmm. And, it was weird. I never thought anyone else would really get it, but it turns out that, there was something there.
You mentioning that you were into skateboard culture, all of a sudden it makes sense how you see the city. Because as a skateboarder, you're looking at these buildings and these curbs as their potential for your skateboarding.
Absolutely.
And so that's how your attention is drawn to details that everyone else would be completely oblivious to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Skateboarding, I really can't. It's just that whole experience was just the core of like my creative drive. From, I got into illustration and stuff like that before I was a photographer or before I was a serious photographer. But really the thing behind it and where it started was with skateboarding. So
you picked up your dad's camera, is that right?
Yeah, it came my way.
Okay, so tell me about that and how that sort of segued into you using the camera in the way that you do.
Okay, so basically when prior to being a photographer and prior to having a real interest in the medium and long after, my graffiti or skateboarding days, I was really into graphic design, or I was interested in graphic design, and I was interested in illustration. And so those were the main things I worked at, and that was the main way that I expressed myself. I always had a sketchbook. I was learning, Photoshop and Illustrator and things like that. And I was also attending Los Angeles Trade Tech College for their visual communications program. That was the beginning of that. In the middle of that program, actually, I was 2 quarters in. My father passed away, which was something that really kind of rocked my world. And I was kind of lost for a while. I didn't immediately get his camera right after he passed away. It was about maybe 2 years. My mom, I guess had it and was like, "Hey, this is your dad's camera. Do you want it?" And yeah, of course. It was one, I didn't have a lot of pieces or things from my father directly. I had a few things, but something as valuable as a camera and as a creative, seeing the potential of a camera, I was really into getting it. And it was a really interesting camera. My dad had an Olympus Pen F half frame camera, so automatically it was different.
Yeah.
And that was I didn't realize, I didn't know it was different until I developed the first roll or got the first roll developed. And I was like, oh, wow, I have little diptychs. Like, this is pretty interesting. And I think that my background as a graphic designer and kind of, as a visual artist, I really saw the potential in that. And I honestly, for the first maybe year, I just took pictures of everything. I had random things. I worked at a Kinko's. I took pictures of copy machines and computers. I took pictures of my cat. Just anything I could take a picture of to just kind of examine it. That's when I took the class at LACC. Anything just to get more of a understanding of how photography worked and what if anything, I would possibly do with it. But after about a year, I moved outside. And I stopped I kind of started taking it a little bit more seriously. And that was really around the time where I lived in Koreatown at the time. I had moved out of my mom's house and I lived on my own near Olympic and Western.
Okay.
And that neighborhood just started transforming. I mean, like really, like this was maybe, around 2000, 2001. And that was when the redevelopment of Los Angeles in that area in particular just really, started to accelerate. They were building the Purple Line station on Western and Wilshire. All of the Purple Line was being constructed or maybe had just opened from downtown. And that was like the first stop. And everyone was like, why does it just stop here? It's, it's like it wasn't as useful. And so I just started taking pictures of how the neighborhood was changing. And really, at the time, Koreatown, it's hard to believe now, was mostly just older apartments and like maybe duplexes and single story. I mean, it was a completely different place. And all of that was gone. And so I started documenting that. And that's how I got on the path that I was at. And really, I didn't take it seriously. But for probably about the next 5 or 6 years, I just did it. It was automatic. I ended up working at a school downtown called FITM, Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, as a computer lab tech. Me and a couple of the other computer lab techs happened to be photographers. One of them was my buddy, Luis Torres. Another one's my buddy, Erwin Racinos. We have a film thing called Snapshot Galleria we do together. But we all shot very similar things in Los Angeles using film. And, that's pretty much how this all got started for me.
It's interesting because, I look at your photographs and that whole thing that you just said about, your graphic design background is really evident in the photographs in terms of how you look at line and shape and how that sort of builds up your frame. But then, as a body of work, you're really trying to express something personal about how you perceive the city. And I think that the transition between the two is what I really would like to talk to you about, because I think a lot of people will make photographs that it's more about the aesthetics rather than what they're trying to say. And some people never figure that out, that they have anything to say. So can you tell me about when you started to realize, maybe I can do something more than just create an individual image that looks good to me and create a body of work that's actually saying something?
Yeah. Yeah, that actually is pretty interesting, and I've never really been able to just take pictures for a visual purpose. And I think it's because I'm used to communicating visually, and things in my life, before I was a photographer, and when things happened to me, I would draw about it, or I would attempt to express myself, in that way. So in a lot of ways, photography definitely filled that gap for me in a way that I was able to communicate kind of the gravity of what I was trying to express in a way that I was never able to communicate through my illustrations. My illustrations are not realistic. So it was very difficult for me to do that. But also it's kind of born of the frustration that I have when I talk about Los Angeles or Hollywood and Koreatown in particular with people who are unfamiliar and having to get through the 10 to 20 minutes of disbelief about where I grew up. It's because there's so much, I don't know if a lot of other areas have so much information that's contrary to what it's actually like to live there. So it really became almost a mission of mine to, one, recognize that I grew up in a really unique place and that not a lot of people from this place have the opportunity to kind of, convey that to other people, but also just to kind of show like, there's a thriving, city life neighborhood that is not only here, but is being almost erased by redevelopment. And I think that a lot of people see the redevelopment as these are, rundown places that are getting torn down and replaced. But in a lot of ways, these rundown places also house people that live there that have made the community as incredible as it is.
Yeah.
The whole reason Hollywood is such a great, and Los Angeles in general, is such a great place to live is because of the people that live there. But the people that live there are being pushed out because other people want to move there. It's this circle, and hopefully. With my work, I've always hoped to just kind of communicate not only what's coming, but what's disappearing.
Yeah. In terms of like architectural design, in terms of just not, like some of these beautiful places in downtown or further out on the west side, I think so much of Los Angeles, or at least my experience of the places where I grew up and I frequented, was that a lot of it was designed to be functional.
Absolutely.
Right? It wasn't so much about trying to pursue a particular aesthetic, especially since Los Angelinos experience the city through the window of their car. Right?
Absolutely.
So this is not a place where you're casually walking down the street and sort of taking in the beauty of your city. You go from point A, from point B, you get what you need, and you go back home.
Yeah.
So to a great degree, that's how people sort of experience all of this thing. It's always on the periphery. Your photographs really force people to take a look at it, to discover what's there and how this, abundance of signage, advertising, concrete, parking, endless parking stalls, and all that stuff has an inherent beauty to it. Was that fairly easy for you to sort of pick up on, or did you refine that vision as you started going out there, beating the streets, making pictures?
It's interesting because one, you brought up the typography and the signage, and that's, coming from a design background, that's obviously a really big influence of mine. Also, from when I was younger, I lived in Hollywood. I moved to Koreatown when I was about 11. And although I still went to, and Koreatown and Hollywood, as you know, they border each other. And I lived near Beverly and Normandy, which is really the border of Koreatown and Hollywood. So It's not too deep in Koreatown, and it's still Hollywood-ish. And so basically for me, growing up in that intersection where, one, you have a large, Central American population, lots of signs in Spanish, and then literally a block over, everything is in Korean. Just, visually, that always kind of inspired me. I mean, it was a very natural thing for me. But it was also at the same time because, although I do understand a little bit of Spanish, I have no grasp of the Korean language, especially the Korean written language. And so a lot of it visually was just very interesting to me. It always caught my eye, regardless of what I may or may not have been reading. And then also working in Koreatown working downtown and living in Koreatown, I took the bus. And taking the bus and also aside from taking the bus, years ago, I've had my Contax T2 little compact camera for about 13 years. So through this whole time, basically in my backpack, I had my T2, and I would take the bus to random places. I would just take pictures of stuff, and I just really didn't think much of it as I was doing it. But that sort of routine of waiting at the bus stop, okay, I'm waiting at the bus stop, there's no bus, I'll take a walk around the block and take some. That was pretty much how this kind of gelled together for me. And after the fact, years and years go by, you kind of look back, and obviously you get better because you're working at something, but then you notice that there's a style that just was there that I didn't necessarily think about.
Yeah,
it just organically came together for me.
I was going to ask about how your shooting process and the fact that you ride the bus made perfect sense to me. It's like, okay, I get it. That makes perfect sense because I don't ride
anymore. The girls and the kids and but that was where it came from.
Yeah, because I was a writer of Richard T. Davis before it became the MTA.
Yes, the Rough, Tough and Dirty. Absolutely.
And for people who don't know, Richard T. Davis was like the hood name for the Rapid Transit District of Los Angeles.
The RTD, yes, and that's an LA classic. Absolutely.
But that whole thing about riding the bus and waiting at a bus stop and the opportunity that provides to explore is a really great and intimate way of discovering the city because, if you're in your car, you have to be purposeful about stopping the car in order to make photographs, which is one of the more frustrating things about Los Angeles because as a photographer, you're constantly seeing great things. But
and driving right by them.
Right. It's a little easier to get off the bus than it is to, where am I going to park the car and all that madness. Well, your work hasn't just been relegated to Hollywood and Koreatown. You did some stuff in the Valley. Mm-hmm. So tell me about how you experienced that part of Los Angeles and how it compared to what you had done before.
The Valley's really interesting, and I'm new to the Valley. Basically how my relationship with the Valley prior to moving there about 4 years ago now, my relationship with the Valley was, like anyone else that lived in, what's considered LA proper, kind of antagonistic or dismissive. It just wasn't I had some family that lived out in the valley. I had a couple buddies that lived out there. My older brothers lived out there in Sherman Oaks when I was younger, so I would go visit them, and they were in the music industry, so it was always fun to go visit them. But that was really my only connection to the valley prior to moving out there. So when I got out there and, rent needed a bigger place. I have two daughters and, I'm not priced out of LA, but you get more bang for your buck just over the hill. And so we went just over the hill, and I live in North Hollywood, where I live in Toluca Lake, right next to North Hollywood. And, after being there for about 6 months, I was like, well, this is where I live. I'm going to explore. This is Los Angeles. And, I was beginning to enjoy living out there. And that was weird. I didn't really expect that. It was so hard for me to kind of be like, oh, I'm going to move to the valley. But then once I got there, I was like, wow, this is actually nice. Like, it's nice for the girls. It's less traffic. And, it was an easy commute for my job. So I began to explore. Started exploring North Hollywood, started exploring Sherman Oaks, Van Nuys, especially Van Nuys Boulevard, near Panorama City, going through some of the back streets or whatnot. And, what I found, to no surprise, obviously, to anyone who lives in the valley or is from there, is a really incredible kind of tucked away part of Los Angeles that a lot of people don't value, I don't think, the way that they should. As of right now, the valley isn't a place that it's not being redeveloped at anywhere near the pace of downtown or Hollywood or anything like that. In a lot of ways, you can find a type of living in Los Angeles that you can't find in Los Angeles anymore, or in central Los Angeles anymore. But it's really it's a place that's changing too. It's changing slowly at a much slower pace, but it's almost like a snapshot in time. But I even in the short time that I've been here or have been living out there, it's things are getting shuttered, things are getting torn down. The best way to say it is the valley's kind of been left to develop in a way that serves its population very well right now. If you live in the valley, you can, there's affordable, food, there's different markets, there's a whole world and a whole support structure for you out there that in Los Angeles is disappearing due to, neighborhoods being gentrified at really rapid rates. Right. And I appreciate that about the valley. And it also reminds me of, it honestly reminds me of Hollywood before the current wave of change. It's very genuine, and I really enjoy living out there. And for me, it's new. It's not places I've been. So every time I go on an excursion in the valley, I'm actually photographing places I haven't seen, and I'm exploring back streets and things like that. And for someone who skateboarded all through Los Angeles his whole life, like, it's pretty cool to go to a place where I don't know where I'm going.
When you go to places that are unfamiliar, do you find that you see it and photograph it considerably differently? Does it stretch you in any way?
Well, yeah, because, one of the things that it does definitely stretch me. And one of the things with the valley in particular is, I try to be careful to fit it into the picture of Los Angeles that I have. And when something's unfamiliar, like, for example, if I'm photographing Hollywood or Koreatown, these are places I've been past a ton of times. I already know in my head what I'm trying to convey, what I'm trying to, express. And in the valley, that's not necessarily the case because it's so unfamiliar. So, my approach is kind of from a place of wonder as opposed to coming from a place of nostalgia. And it's I try to keep an open mind. And, I've met a couple photographers that live and document the valley, before I moved there. And so kind of talking to them about their experiences and things like that. Like these are sort of things like I just try to be, whenever I visit a place, whenever I photograph a place or a city that I'm attempting to document that's not a neighborhood I'm from, I just try to be careful, deliberate, and to do my homework. Okay. I don't want to go in and say, this is what I saw, so this is how it is, because that's what upsets me so much about people that come to LA, for a week and they shoot downtown LA and they're like, oh my God, look, I got LA figured out. And I'm like, LA is infinite, as I'm learning because I'm in the valley trying to figure it out. So I really just try to be as careful and as open-minded as possible.
Tell me about coming to the realization that you had something that would be of interest to others? Because as photographers, we can work on our personal projects and, be pleased at what we're doing and thinking we're doing really interesting work. But, you've gotten a good amount of attention to the work. So could you tell me about coming to the realization that someone might actually want to be looking at this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, it really has a lot to do with social media, but not in a superficial way. I've always kind of approached, because I my design background, and currently, I work at a school. I do a lot of web design. I design my own websites. Like I'm a design guy. Mm-hmm. So, when I look at social media, I try to use it in that manner. I use it, I have a private account for, my baby pictures and things like that. But, for the accounts that I have that are public, I really just tried to put stuff out there that I thought was interesting and kind of gauge the reaction. I mean, I don't let it influence what I shoot, but at the same time, it's kind of what I've always wished for before it came into existence, which was a sounding board. You put something out there. If people hate it, they hate it. If people like it, they like it. But you at least find out. It's like a critique or whatnot. Like people are always like, don't read the comments. I always read the comments. I read the comments because they're really interesting to me, because whether you love or hate my work, I like to know that. I like to know why. I mean, for people that have an adverse reaction to it, I can see where they're coming from. I'm not going to not shoot what I shoot, but I understand. And so that's a valuable context to me. But I would honestly say that, about a year and a half ago, maybe I had put out the Hollywood one, Sacred Space. And it was a photo set. It was like 10 pictures. And I wrote a little bit about growing up in in that particular neighborhood of Hollywood. And that was the first time I had done that. I mean, before that, I had experimented with a lot of different formats for the Los Angeles recordings. I'd experimented with just pictures and a picture a day and all of the different ways you can try to put your work out there. But really, like when I put up that set and I wrote like 3 paragraphs about it, I put it up and I thought it was pretty interesting. I sent it to this person named Ian Sargent with Another Place. And he liked it, and he put it on his Tumblr, and people really liked it. And I thought, wow, that's cool. I mean, that's a win for me. I had some things published on a website called LA Taco, which is a pretty big website here for like social stuff, and it had gotten a good response. But that was the first time where it was a photography focused publication that actually saw my work, thought it was worthy of putting up on the Tumblr. And it got a good response. So that was kind of a boost for me. But really, it was a little bit after that when I published a set called Foreign Land on the Valley that got picked up by Curbed LA. The editor at Curbed LA sent me an email, really nice woman named Jenna Chandler, and basically wanted to republish it on Curbed. And I thought that, I was like, of course, it wasn't like for pay or anything fancy. It was just like, hey, we like your story. It's interesting. We'd like to share it. And it was got a really big response on Curbed. And a lot of the response was about how much people love or hate the Valley. And some of it had to do with the photography, but a lot of it had to do with the Valley and just a general conversation in general and, about, blight and urban development and things like that. It had a lot of comments. It trended on Curbed LA for a while. And I think that was the first time that I realized that, okay, this is a perspective that, is worth pursuing, and I started the Los Angeles recordings really with no intention of any of this. Like this was totally not the point. Like I really wanted to just put my work out, and if people liked it, they liked it, and if they didn't, that was cool. I mean, I'm a photographer. I'm gonna put it up. But that's kind of what got the ball rolling, and from there, things just kind of started to build a little bit.
Yeah, because it's really interesting that your work can get a wide range of reactions or evoke a lot of deep feelings. Not so much, as you said, about the work itself, but how people feel about what you're documenting and what you're showing in your photographs. Some people can look at it and, like me, just love it, and I can see other people looking at it and just absolutely hating it because they reflect. Oh yeah, because it reflects everything that they hate about the city.
Absolutely, and that's it's so interesting. I mean, because it's like I don't, one of the things that I caught from that first Curbed LA piece was more than, and this has been a fairly common, reaction to somebody why does he take pictures of empty parking lots? Why photograph urban blight? Why, there's this whole reaction to it, and it's a really interesting reaction, and I respect that perspective. Like, that's not something, I'm trying to belittle or anything like that. It's just that, I grew up in that sort of environment, and I just don't see it that way. When I go to different neighborhoods, or if I go to either neighborhoods I'm from or other neighborhoods, like, I don't go with an agenda to depict it in a certain way. I'm not going to just photograph the pretty part. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to just photograph the empty parking lot. I'm trying to basically, show a general picture of an area through the way that I see things. And the way that I see things, I find beauty in a lot of that. I mean, I find a composition there. Like, I'm going to take that picture. That's just what it is. I just photograph what's there. Yeah. And I try to be as democratic about it as possible. There's
a street in Los Angeles, Slauson Avenue.
Yeah.
And my parents, our family home is on Gage and Figueroa.
Okay.
So Slauson is a street that I have gone up and down hundreds of thousands of times, probably. And that street holds an incredible fascination for me, just because the colors, the architecture that you reflect in your photographs, sort of the change. It seems like it's like an abstract painting. There's just such a mashup of stuff, and especially the color, because I think a lot of it is influenced by the colors from Mexico and South America. So you have these very saturated pinks and yellows and purples that are just like, just an assault of the eyes sometimes. But but mashed up on this street, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, so absolutely.
I see that, and I see it as beautiful. I see it as something I like to look at. Other people would just go, Jesus Christ. What are these people thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of that has to do with, people just don't. I mean, some of it is, a purely kind of like, stylistic like reaction to it, like, oh, that doesn't fit with what I think is beautiful. But, what I've found is that a lot of people just don't see LA like that. And it's a jarring picture to them. Mm-hmm. I never get, people that are from Los Angeles completely get what I'm photographing.
Right.
For the most part. Mm-hmm. Whether you've ever lived in Los Angeles, if you have any experience with being here for a period of time, you understand, whether you agree with it or not, you understand what I'm trying to convey. A lot of times for people that are from outside the area, it's really kind of a shock that this is what LA looks like on, the vast majority of Los Angeles looks like. And that's just so weird to me. I mean, as someone who's from there, it's just like, but I mean, I get it. I mean, it's a city that's so selectively, depicted in movies and, and on the big screen. And it's so rarely shown in an accurate way that, the narrative has become real for people.
Yeah, but I think that's the value of the photographs that you're making, is that it serves, both sides. The people who are experienced with the city, who are familiar, who your images reflect their experience, and an introduction to people who have no idea what the city largely is about, and they see that, and they may be shocked by it, but it's revealing of a part of the truth about what the city is like. Because this city is wide enough, large enough, and diverse enough that you bring in 100 photographers, and they're going to give you 100 different takes.
100%.
On the city. In terms of, you get the feedback from people, you have friends you share your work with, but you're working on this over a long period of time. And talk to me about those moments where you doubt yourself, or you thinking about, what the hell am I doing? Because I think that's one of the challenges of working on a project for a long period of time, is trying to figure out, okay, what am I doing? When am I finished? Is this work any good? So how do you sort of maneuver around all of those issues and continue doing the work?
That's actually a really good question, because I mean, that's something that fluctuates a lot for me. And I mean, really the best way for me is like, or the best way I can kind of explain it is when, earlier when I got into photography, I tried a lot of different types of photography. Like I said, my brothers are in the music industry. I shot concerts. I had access to things behind behind stages. I tried portraiture, and none of those things kept my attention the way that like landscape and this sort of photography does. And then I also like natural landscapes, and I do dot my websites and things like that with some natural landscapes. I like going to Malibu Creek State Park, and anything that's wide and open, I like to photograph. So there is a side of me there too that that can come in. But as far as this project, I just as far as doubting myself, I think part of art and part of being an artist is that doubt, and then a lot of times that becomes the fuel. I just keep going. I really just kind of put my head down and keep going. That's pretty much the lesson that like life has taught me, and things with photography, things outside of photography. I constantly am rewarded for my determination by kind of sticking to what I believe is going to work. I just never thought like any of this would kind of even be a thing. It's kind of had me dumbfounded, and I've had to really think about, how I got here and what lessons to take from the past year, which was pretty much the year where I got some really nice amount of attention for my work. And, the lesson I kind of took from it is that I need to kind of stick to my guns and keep going, because whatever it is, it's obviously there's an audience for it.
Right.
Before any of this, and when a couple of years ago, I remember showing my my work to a colleague, and I showed this person my illustration work, and I showed him my photography, and he really liked my illustration. He's like, "You're a really good illustrator. It's really cool." Blah blah blah. And he looked at my photography. He's like, "I just don't know why you take pictures of that." That was just really, he's like, and not in a negative way. He wasn't being like, he wasn't being a bad guy. He just didn't get it, a couple of photography teachers. I had an excellent photography teacher when I went to Cal State LA. That's where I got my design degree from. And I took all photography electives because that's what I was interested in. And Jack Butler, I had a really good teacher named Jack Butler, great guy, great photographer also. And he was really encouraging of the type of stuff that I was doing. And this was really when I was starting to kind of find a style for the Los Angeles recordings. And I happened to have access to their color darkroom. So I was basically in the color darkroom for a year and a half, hand printing these things, shooting, developing, actually printing it out, in color by hand. And that really helped me. And then I also had a great photographer who we had critiques. We had to put sets together. I got feedback on it, and it was constructive, because in the past, other photography teachers, not at LACC, but other places, would look at my stuff and they're like, it's okay. It just didn't fit their bill of what was an exciting or great photograph, but that's okay, because I just figured at some point they didn't really get what I was trying to express.
Which is a good lesson to have, because sometimes people don't get it.
Yeah, you just got to do it. Really, you just got to.
Absolutely. So my last question, which I pose to each guest, is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore on their own. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be, and why?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm gonna keep it into the home team. I have a good friend, Luis Torres, that I do Snapshot Galleria with. He goes under the moniker Lou13 on Instagram or whatnot. Really, one of the biggest influences on my photography early, and one of my buddies to this day. But one of those photographers that really is just about the work. He shoots, relentlessly. My buddy Erwin and I constantly harass him to put out more things, and he's just so good. So I would probably say Luis Torres would definitely be the guy that I would recommend.
Oh, cool. Well, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed having a chance to sit down and talk with you.
Oh, no, this was great. I thanks for reaching out to me. This was a great way to spend a Friday afternoon. Absolutely.
Thanks to Kwasi for joining us this week. Find out more about Kwasi and his work by visiting QuasiBoydBouldin.com. And remember to visit the Candid Frame website for a regular column that will appear each Wednesday. We will also be featuring the Candid Frame listeners who contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr pool throughout the year. And you can show your support of the Candid Frame by writing a review in the iTunes Store. It not only helps our ranking, but it helps us to stand out among the many thousands of podcasts that are out there. If you believe in what we're doing, take the time today to write a review. It will only take a few minutes and will make a huge difference. Thanks to Manitoba, Canada, for his 5-star review. You could also support the show by making a monthly contribution through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/thecandidframe, or you'll find a link in the show notes and the Candid Frame website. Or if you just want to make a one-time contribution to the show, you can do so via PayPal by clicking on a donate button on the Candid Frame website or the show notes. Thanks to Derek Brown for his recent contribution. It really makes a difference. To access our complete archive of interviews, download the free Candid Frame app, available for Apple iOS and Android. Not only will you immediately receive the latest episode on your phone or tablet, but you can now easily share your favorite episodes on your social networks and help spread the word. And if you want to drop me a line with comments or suggestions for the show, you can email me directly from the app. Download it today by clicking on the link in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at simply @IbarianX. And this is IbarianX, and this is The Candid Frame.